Hello everyone, welcome to another DC motion debrief. I'm Jayageeth Basnayake and today we'll be looking at the AISDC 2025 prep motion. The motion reads, this house predicts that the US will withdraw support for Israel within the next 15 years. Now, this house predicts is a new type of motions. Unlike the this house regrets and this house supports types of motions, what judges expect in this type of motion is you proving the likelihood of whatever you're claiming in your motion, the likelihood of that occurring in the future based on the data that you have right now, the trajectories that you can draw from that data, or past data that you have for which you have conclusive evidence, or you can make certain assumptions based on the past data that you have. So it's not the typical approach you take for something like a this house prefers motion, but you have to be a bit more innovative when it comes to motions like this. Now a good example of this is the contention that was brought upon in the exact same debate that I judged along with two panelists on the exact same motion at AISDC 2025. Within the debate, there was a heavy contention about what exactly this withdrawal will look like, and even though it was debated amongst the two teams, after the debate the panelists as well as the debaters and a few spectators were able to discuss and sort of come to a conclusion about what could have been the best strategy when it comes to what this withdrawal is going to look like. What we did come to a conclusion was that this withdrawal is not going to be sudden, it's not going to happen overnight, rather it's going to happen across a few stages, where firstly it's that the USA will withdraw its political support for Israel. That means the USA is not going to veto every single resolution, or there will be a progressive downfall in the political connections between the two countries. Although it does seem very dystopian, that's kind of what you have to prove on crop. And there is quite good evidence that it could happen. It's a big if on both sides about what you are trying to predict in such a motion. But secondly, when it comes to things like finances, trade, and everything beyond politics, you cannot say that it's simply magically going to disappear, because the globalized world doesn't allow you to do that. But what could happen is that there will not be future expansion, or there is going to be limited funding when it comes to financial support, or there is going to be little to no funding in about 20 to 30 years come the political withdrawal that we are talking about. So teams must be incredibly innovative when it comes to defending a motion like this, because you also have the freedom to sort of talk about the future based on the current trajectories. So teams have a lot of freedom, but ultimately it's the likelihood of what you want to prove within this debate, or the likelihood of whatever you want to conclude happening in the future, is what's really going to stand an edge in this debate. Alright, we'll go to the prop case of this motion. Let's look at framing. Now we all know that the USA and Israel are incredibly close allies, be it trade, politics, or basically everything that they are involved in. One of the primary reasons for that is from the 1950s onwards, when Israel was an emerging state, the USA constantly backed them up for reasons that involved World War II, the immigration of Jews, and also both countries having a good understanding within each other. So this has been a very long-standing partnership, and it's become a strategic Middle Eastern battle hub for the USA, whereas the USA have become the big brother ally for Israel to sort of expand on its own, because they know ultimately on the world stage they have the most powerful country backing them up. So it's been a brilliant deal so far. However, we must understand what the current US political system looks like. We all know that Donald Trump has been re-elected, beating his own opponent from the 2019 election. So it's come into a Republican political cycle from a Democratic political cycle. And this time, Donald Trump emphasizes on becoming an independent global giant, That means cutting down on imports, cutting down on unnecessary spending, and sort of becoming a self-sustained nation. This is going to have a heavy implication when it comes to the argumentation as well. Thirdly, we also must understand that the US public just overthrew a leader or a government of a leader that heavily endorsed Israel. We are all quite familiar with how Joe Biden was a constant supporter of Israel. Now, the United States in general have been quite supportive of Israel, but there has been varying levels of how you endorse them in public or how you endorse them in the world stage. Joe Biden has been on quite on the right of the extreme when it comes to supporting Israel at times, whereas Donald Trump has been very mysterious when it comes to his political alliances and how he portrays these political alliances. So it's going to be interesting when it comes to argumentation. But ultimately, the final conclusion that we can make is that the political intentions of the United States have shifted. Now, secondly, what does Israel look like? This is going to be incredibly important because Israel is now under world siege for what it's doing with Palestine. So it's not easy for Israel to look good in many people's books. Secondly, there is an unstable political field within Israel. Even though it's a democracy, Benjamin Netanyahu has very much of an authoritarian regime. He has been taking a lot of decisions with a very select few people from the parliament. He has cut down a lot on government spending, cut down on wages, primarily to fund the ongoing war and expansionary measures. Plus, he has been expanding the war to beyond Palestine into countries like Lebanon, Syria, and Iran. So it's a really scary scenario when it comes to global equilibrium, when it comes to peace, and especially the Middle East is a very, very volatile place when it comes to how Israel deals with it. Now, another big issue that will come up in this debate is about Israel being non-compliant to conditions in agreements. At the time of this video being recorded, there is a ceasefire deal, but we've also heard multiple reports about how they have not stuck onto the very same conditions that they came up with within the ceasefire deal. So it's extremely uncertain about what Israel's next move will be. So this uncertainty is also something that the world has had to deal with, and the USA has also had to deal with. But finally, let's look at the international landscape. Now, it's no secret that Israel and the USA have had a very big black mark when it comes to their approach to Palestine and how they've been sort of enraging a war and killing millions of people and making millions of people homeless and helpless. So that is a big issue that they have to deal with on their own. But in the contrary of that, there is a new political bloc that has been rapidly gaining momentum, and which is the BRICS alliance, where basically countries like Brazil, Russia, India, China, and Saudi Arabia and South Africa have come together to form an alliance that is going to rival, which are basically standing rival to the United States and of course the EU as well. So there is a very big development in that region as well. So that's also going to be very, very interesting, and it's going to be important in this argument as well. The first argument that I see in this debate is the economic concern that's going to be there for the US. Now, obviously, we know that the United States of America is not in the best economic condition. $33 trillion in debt, rising inflation, and a change in political leadership, or constant changes in political leadership, meaning recurring changes in economic policies. Now, recurring changes in economic policies means that there is not going to be stable development or long-term stable development of a country. Obviously, the USA is far more stable than much more countries, but to tackle the economic issues right now, there is a sort of uncertainty, and market confidence is really, really on the balance. On top of that, there are a lot of provisions that the USA will have to make, like sudden payments when it comes to climate change, let's say. the LA wildfires, for example, has been incredibly harmful in terms of economy. More than $500 million lost in terms of collateral and property. On top of that, there could be other issues like the coronavirus or any sort of global pandemic outbreak. So basically, all of these are provisions that the USA need to have ready in order to maintain their economy at a stable level. Now, why is supporting Palestine uniquely economically infeasible for this country? There's a low return on investment for the United States. Basically, they don't reap as much of a benefit that they wanted to within this war, which is primarily what Israel has been focusing on, rather than military development or enhancement of global security. And as the war progresses on, the attitude that Israel has been portraying, which is that they want to expand into Middle East and sort of invade into other countries like Lebanon, this is a growing concern about where exactly is the war going to end. USA, their strongest ally, has also become an incredibly vocal critique of their actions sometimes. So the return on investment of making such a big investment into this war is incredibly low. On top of that, we also have a leader who is now pushing on an agenda of self-sustainability and trying to keep the money to themselves. We saw how Donald Trump actively withdrew troops and finalized the deal to free Afghanistan from the USA basically after investing more than $2 trillion into that operation. Only for the Taliban that they beat back in 2009 or around that area to reclaim power in Afghanistan. So despite what happened within Afghanistan, USA decided that they are going to care for their own interests. So this is going to be very interesting when it comes to how USA will realign their focus coming into the next decade or so. Excuse me. Plus, the non-compliance of Israel when it comes to international agreements means that there is a lot of potential risk that you have when it comes to investments. So we've already spoken about how the expansionary measures are going to be incredibly costly, but the non-compliance means that there is no certainty of when this war is most likely to end. So the war spending is something like a never-ending tale for USA if they wish to continue. The second argument we are going to discuss under this is pressure. Two levels of pressure under this. Firstly, internal pressure. We already discussed about how there is a high likelihood of mainly the Trump administration to sort of pull out of this or start pulling out of this agreement to make sure that they are re-elected on the same principles that they brought forward, which is making the country much more self-sustainable, less dependent on imports, and growing businesses. But on top of that, the political unpopularity for pro-Israeli support has been growing within the USA. Secondly, pressure to know where exactly your taxpayer money is going and how exactly is it benefiting you as a taxpayer is rising. And all of this means that the incredibly powerful US public have the power to vote out a government and bring in a new one. So if there are any re-election incentives, which there clearly will be, this Republican government will sort of pave the way for a gradual withdrawal in the future, where this cost will not be borne by the United States of America. The likelihood of this is that the US voter base is incredibly volatile. They can make rapid switches. So if you do not implement any sort of mechanism right now, which will ensure that, in about 10 or 15 years, we are not going to have this to deal with anymore, just like the Obama administration promising that they'll be removing troops in his by the end of his second term. These sort of promises or implementations that lead up to this will be incredibly important for this government rather to be re-elected.
leading up to an eventual or definite withdrawal in the future. But when it comes to international political pressure, it's going to be very, very unique. Given that Israel is sort of seen like a negative player in the world stage, it will directly impact USA's standing when it comes to the international arena. I hope you remember the framing that I brought about BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, basically forming an alliance to tackle and rival the USA and EU rather. So why exactly is the BRICS going to be a big part of this? I feel like with the emergence of the BRICS currency, that's inevitably going to come, I'd say.
The second type of pressure I'll talk about here is the international political pressure rather. Given that Israel is not seen as the best player when it comes to international relations or in the international arena right now, I believe the emergence of a particular coalition is going to heavily impact the United States when it comes to popularity and more people sort of agreeing with the United States perspective on certain things. Because BRICS is going to be a super coalition of five of the most powerful countries in the world, which will be a rivaling organization to the United States and the EU. With the emergence of a BRICS currency, the loss of the petrodollar agreement, and the globalization making the world less dependent on strictly American MNCs, or American MNCs actually being bought out by countries like China and India, means that the USA is slowly losing its dominance to these major players in the world stage. You top it off with the rising unpopularity, the switching cost that the people have when it comes to BRICS alliances as opposed to the USA is going to be incredibly low, because already the BRICS is an emerging coalition and more people will want to switch onto that path. I know it's not as simple as it sounds, but on a macroeconomic perspective, basically the United States, if it looks like a hostile environment when it comes to an IR level, it's much more feasible to align with the BRICS alliance, let's say, where they'll also try to doctor in a reasonable explanation as to why they are better than the US in an IR perspective. Now, the likelihood of this happening even further is because the BRICS is actually an emerging coalition, and there's a high likelihood that they're going to be even more powerful in 15 years. And if there is no definite answer to this, and if the USA is seen as this very vicious ally to a vicious country like Israel, it's going to be incredibly hard for them to garner the interest of companies and investors, and they are inevitably going to switch when it comes to the choice of whether it's BRICS or USA. So this is going to play out majorly, and the likelihood of it happening is incredibly high, as I've proven to you. Now, the third argument that I want to talk about is the misalignment to the US's future plans. We've already discussed about their expansionary measures and how they have a very big rival coming up. So they want to make sure that they don't really go down running to a new coalition that's been formed. But let's look at Israel and what the USA is actually looking for. Israel has been a traditional ally. Sure, they've had a lot of cash pumping into the economy. They've been a very developed economy. They're a very good democratic system running within the Middle East, which is very rare to see in a Middle Eastern country. But when you compare that to other emerging countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar, for example, they have higher or bigger plans of expansion. They have more capital for expansion. They have more opportunities to reap from. Like the Neom City project, a $1 trillion project in Saudi, or Qatar, where the US has strategically based one of its largest army and intelligence bases. So an alliance with countries like this, or a strong alliance with countries like this, is going to be incredibly vital if the USA is also to maintain their global dominance. Why is Israel going to be a hindrance to this? And this is going to be incredibly important. Israel is one of the most volatile countries when it comes to their relations within the Middle East. They've been plotting moves against countries like Iran, and their incredibly high military security has been a threat to other countries, and they haven't been dealing well with their Middle Eastern counterparts themselves. So when the United States actually approaches into countries like Saudi and Qatar to form long-term partnerships, Israel is going to be a hindrance, because that is not necessarily an ally that they want to work with. So it comes at an opportunity cost of whether you let go of Israel in the long run to join new forces, new coalitions with countries like Saudi and Qatar, or do you compromise Saudi and Qatar, new emerging countries with better booming developing economies, to focus on your traditional ally? I feel like the likelihood is more tipping towards you actually letting go of your traditional ally if you really want to stick to the economic principles that we put out, which is an expansion. Plus, I've already given you an argument about how the new emerging BRICS economy is going to hinder the US's plans to sort of become a global supergiant. Obviously, these arguments aren't going to be perfect. There will be a sort of refinement that will be needed. But these are the three basic levels of argumentation that I feel like is going to make an impact in a debate like this. Primarily because you cannot defend this entire alliance completely. Neither can you ignore this alliance based on the traditional facts that you have. So you have to look at interlinking factors outside of the traditional facts to sort of draw a unique link and portray this to the judge.
Alright, let's look at the Opp case for this. Now, on the outset, you could say this is much less likely to happen. And if you look at this motion in an unbiased way, it's fair for you to think that it's more likely that it won't happen. But as I've already proven to you, there can be arguments made on prop as well. But on opposition, you need to have a sort of in-depth analysis as to why this is much less likely to happen in the future. And I think there are three primary reasons or three primary arguments that I could come up with as to why exactly this is going to happen, or why it's not going to happen rather. Firstly, it's about America being immune to pressures of change. As we've seen, the United States of America is incredibly powerful, but they've also been kind of independent when it comes to major global decisions. For example, they just decided to withdraw out of the WHO. They decided to withdraw out of the Paris Accord. They decide to fund certain countries. They take a lot of decisions on their own, and a lot of countries don't step up to attack them rather when it comes to decisions like this. So they sort of stand on a freehold when they have to make decisions. And secondly, they have the Security Council veto power when it comes to security concerns. They've already vetoed multiple resolutions about an Israel-Palestine ceasefire. So they single-handedly could stop the world from achieving some sort of relief from the war. So they have that power, and they really don't listen to other countries, let's say, or other stakeholders that they don't put a lot of importance into. Plus, they also control a lot of key elements when it comes to the world stage, be it weapons or even the media. So the way they portray themselves in the media is really, really different. But their portrayals outside of America doesn't really affect them because of how they have the power to alter the media to look good in a certain way. Or the weapons market where they have a monopoly, and it's been a definite source of income in times of war. So basically they won't go against their two primary powers when it comes to the world stage. Thirdly, it's about changing political landscape and how there are more proximate issues like job security and inflation, which is basically toppled over this whole issue about Israel, and basically it's going to wash away the effects of this. Why I would say this is because, contrary to what we said on opposition, we can assume that there is proven evidence to say that United States voter base is a very proximate issue-based motor base. Yes, there are historical issues that need solving, but the present issue in the immediate present or future is something that the US public will put much more attention into. It has been proven thus far, and it's highly likely that they're gonna focus on other issues come election time, and this might not be on the agenda for every single American to deal with. So the whole pressure argument that we come up in our prop can be washed away in our op itself. However, I advise when you make a prep case, don't try to wash away your arguments with your immediate other side, which means don't try to wash away your own op arguments with your own prop arguments. But basically, there's less of a likelihood that pressure can actually create any change because the USA is inevitably very immune to change. Second argument is about financial benefit and the comparison to alternatives that you can go to. Israel has already established a good Middle Eastern hub for the USA to conduct its military operations. They have an established trade and supply route. They have established military understanding, political understanding. They've already had so much of cross usage of resources. The USA has a higher political leverage over Israel than any other country, and it's basically a gateway to Central Middle Eastern politics when it comes to controlling the Middle Eastern defense systems or security, for example. And the USA has uniquely used Israel as a charter nation when it comes to committing heinous acts when it comes to invading other countries. For example, back in the 1980s and 1990s, it is said that the USA secretly funded Israel in invading Lebanon and invading Syria, where they had no clear intentions as Israel, but the hidden intentions and motives of the USA actually came about, which is where the speculation is drawn at. So all of these establishments have come through decades and decades of being an alliance. And this is something that's very hard to replicate with other alternatives because it's really, really hard to establish these alliances in such a short period of time. And the USA will not want to let go of one of its most cherished and precious alliances when it comes to the advantages that they get from maintaining this alliance. So it's not going to be economically feasible enough for them to just let go of this alliance and be like, oh, we're going to move into a new alliance and we're going to look at alternatives from now on. So it's the likelihood of them actually letting go of such an established alliance in favor of a newer alternative that they're going to have to invest much more in creating these alliances. It's highly unlikely that they're really going to move on with this. Third argument then is about the vicious binding agreement of USA and Israel. I think this is sort of a unique argument, which is the USA and Israel have used their resources interchangeably for the benefit of both countries. For example, both countries have always used each other's intelligence services. The CIA, the FBI collaborating with Mossad, one of the most powerful intelligence services in the world. So they've been really, really helpful when it comes to maintaining peace, or when it comes to maintaining operations, let's say, for the United States. Plus, there are a lot of, let's say, issues that have been concealed, or a lot of deeds that have been concealed by either countries because of the power that they hold. They've concealed a lot of truth. There have been speculations of money fraud and laundering, the Mossad and CIA collaborations when it comes to criminal hunt downs and chartered invasions, as we previously discussed. All of this is something that both countries have been able to get away because they've come into an agreement to not let go of each other when it comes to the judgment. So losing a dependable ally like this is going to be incredibly harmful for either country because it leaves a big loot, or it leaves both countries open-ended when it comes to these cases. And they are left off at a risk. They are either country, now that they don't have an obligation towards each other, actually letting out critical information or creating a defensive threat of its own to a country like this, given that they know so much of intricate information, how political insiders can now become whistleblowers, how new threats can emerge because of the non-existence of this alliance. So basically, it's going to be a much more problematic endeavor for either country to just let go of this alliance and basically look at new possible options. Israel doesn't have any incentive to sort of let go, given that the amount of immunity they get from USA is incredibly high. It's highly unlikely they're going to find another alternative then. Whereas the USA, like we previously mentioned, has used Israel to the best of its abilities to make sure that they dominate the Middle East via Israel. So the likelihood of this happening, the likelihood of this withdrawal happening is incredibly low, because so far they've been using each other rather perfectly to achieve their own goals, and it's not going to be strategic enough for them to just let go of this. Obviously, there will be condemnation or there will be critique when it comes to certain actions from either countries, but that doesn't mean that this alliance is likely to fall down. So that's basically what the Opp case would look like. Ultimately, we've discussed how Prop and Opp will look like in this debate. These are not perfect arguments, but these are sort of thinking mechanisms that you can use when it comes to a debate like this. How you think of the externalities that would come into play, how you think about the short term and long term, how you think about the past actions of these countries and what exactly has happened between these two countries in the present, and the trajectories that you can draw out of it. So, like I previously said, when you are a debater, you have to prove all of this to sort of stand an edge when it comes to a motion like this. It's not as simple as just saying, this is why we prove that this is true. The likelihood of this happening is what's going to actually drive the argument home in debating terms. So that's it from me. I hope you all had an informative debrief, and yeah, I'll hopefully see you all with another debrief. Thank you so much for joining in, and keep following the DC for more interesting debriefs like this. Thank you.